But I have a mental block about what I'm Friday. And I suppose in this city, must have been Good Friday long, I don't know. It's the dominance. But if we were, couldn't get past the block over. Just consistently, I'm under. Good Friday. Did I not say that to you about the religious experience of something? It was you, the girls, and everything. You should be one of the early people. Yeah. Yeah, used to do that with Jason. Yeah, never. That's fine. Early, I could say, but you went out for breakfast.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We will get started. Thank you for joining once again. Looking forward to this class, which I believe is a very fascinating class. Before we start, I'd like to say that, and maybe I'll mention it again at the end. I know we have some more people here, but next week we will not have our class. We will skip next week. Next week is Hanukkah, and we will finish off the class, the last one, lesson number 6. We will do in 2 weeks, which will be the 18th, December 18th, and we will finish our course then. Obviously, this coming week is Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a festival of lights, which again we're learning Kabbalah. A lot of what we're learning is about the lights. And last week we learned about the lights and the vessels. So there's definitely a very strong Kabbalistic twist in Hanukkah. And if you look in Kabbalah, there's a lot of deeper. We know the miracle, the story, but there's goes a lot deeper. But I'd like to highlight a few of the different events that we'll be having over here for Hanukkah. I mentioned it last week, but I'll mention it again. On Thursday, the first night of Hanukkah, we will be having a menorah celebration, a dreidel celebration. Now, if the dreidel gets up, that's, I hope. If you could say a prayer for the dreidel. But the frame is up. You can take a look at the back afterwards, but the frame is up. But, hopefully we'll get up. And Thursday at 5:30, we'll be lighting the first candle. And we're having a nice celebration over here. So please join us on Thursday at 5:30. Sunday, we will be having our annual menorah lighting at the park at Tamarack Recreation Center. That will be Sunday at 4:30 p.m. With a special, unique menorah. This year, we'll be having a ice menorah in Florida. Carved out, we'll have a special carving of the menorah. And that will be Sunday. And then on Tuesday, we will be having our annual menorah lighting and kosher food tasting at Publix, and that's going to be on Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Now, with everything happening with Hanukkah, and Hanukkah is a festival of joy, as a time we gather, it's also important that we don't forget, and obviously what's on everyone's mind is what's happening in Israel, and our brothers and sisters on the front lines. So with that being said, I'd like to start off, as we start off every single week, with a chapter of Tehillim. Again, I will say it. If you're able to read, it's pretty small, but if you're able to read, you could say alongside with me. Chapter 20. What is that? Tamarack Recreation Center. It's, I believe, 7501 University Drive. It's down the block. It's right under the overpass. Yes. Yeah. Lamanatseach Mizmar LeDavid. Yancha Adenobi Yamtzara Yisavgevcha Shem Elohei Yaakov. Yishlach Ezocha Mikodesh. Umetzian Yisadeka. Yiskar Kolmanus Asecha. Chol Atzascha Yimali. Nuranida B'Shu Asecha Ub'Shem Eloheinu Nigdal. Yimali Adonai Kol Mashal Asecha. Ati Adaiti. Ki Yeshia Adonai Mashichai. Yaneu B'Shmei Kushli B'Gvuras Yeshei Minai. Eila V'Rechev Eila V'Asusim. V'Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Naskir. Hey Makaru B'Nafalu V'Anachnu Kamra V'Nasaydad. Adonai Yeshia. Hamelech Haneinu V'Yem Karenu. The conductor, a song of David. May the Lord answer you on a day of distress. May the name of God of Jacob fortify you. May he send you aid from sanctuary and may he support you from Zion. May he remember all your meal offerings and may accept your fat burnt offerings forever. May he give you as your heart desires and may he fulfill all your counsel. Let us sing praises for your salvation and let us assemble in the name of our God. May the Lord fulfill all your requests. Now I know that the Lord saved his anointed. He answered him from his holy heavens with a mighty act of salvation from his right hand. Those trust in chariots and those in horses. But we mention the name of the Lord our God. They kneel and fall, but we rise and gain strength. The Lord save us. May the King answer us on the day we call. As we do every single every class so far, we also dedicate one of the class towards whether it was a hero or someone who lost their life. So this was going around last week. I'm sure you heard of the family, the Bibas family. The Bibas family, who there's 4 of them that is being held by Hamas. Hamas said that they were killed. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen. They have said such a thing before about a hostage and turned out to be alive. So we have Kfir, Ariel, Shiri, and Yarden. If they're still alive, we hope for their safe return. If not, we pray for their soul. And to get them together with all the other hostages, may they be returned to Israel, to their loved ones. And our hearts and minds are with them as we learn this class. Okay, so like last week, this class is going to be from the deepest parts of Kabbalah, very abstract, but there is also a very powerful, profound takeaway and very relevant idea, which I'm excited to discuss with you. And hopefully we'll be able to walk away gaining a deeper understanding, even if we don't understand everything, and even if some parts are a little bit too abstract, but be able to be able to tap into some ideas of what we are learning. So we were going to talk about, today's class is called The Great Concealment. We will be talking about the tzimtzumim. In Kabbalah, that is a very popular word, the tzimtzum. And that tzimtzum literally translates as contraction. We'll discuss what that means. What does it mean when we speak about contraction? And we already touched upon it in the second lesson. We will expound on that. And we will be touching upon struggles in our own lives. Every single one of us, we struggle. Every single one of us has moments in life, those dark moments in life, those painful moments in life. And we will take a look at what Kabbalah tells us. If there's any meaning to those moments, if there's anything we can take away. Again, as we've been doing till now, we will be discussing the mirror image. Again, both how it works in godliness, how it works in the divine, and then how it works in our own lives. Because we were created as a mirror to God. And therefore, whatever is up there, whatever is in the divine, mirrors itself down here as well. So last week, we spoke about our negative drives. We spoke about our animalistic nature, where it comes from, the source of it. But today, we will discuss more about our struggles as an individual, not necessarily our animalistic urges, but the struggles we have in life, the painful moments we have in life, both as an individual and as a people. And what is the Jewish approach? Everyone has adversity in life. How do we not crumble in the face of adversity? And if someone were to ask you this question, someone were to ask you, you're going through a hard time, they're struggling, what would you respond to them? In your mind is the Torah approach. In your mind, or forget about the Torah approach, what would you tell them? Anyone wants to? Yes.
After experiencing the loss of my husband, I understand now, and I tell people now, without faith in Hashem, I don't know how to come to it. Honestly, that connection is what helped me get up and live every day when I did not want to.
Okay,
so I would say explore that a little bit. Maybe.
That's very powerful. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Perhaps suggest that first you could ever imagine happening to you. After it's happened to you, you discover it's not the worst.
Okay, there could always be worse. So the truth is, when we speak about pain and we speak about struggle, oftentimes our mind takes us to the worst possible scenario. The Holocaust is something people always bring up. And while we may not be able to appreciate the worst case scenario, but let's perhaps speak about some of the lesser challenges. If we can find meaning, if we can find direction in those things which are not the worst case scenario. Again, we are going to take a Jewish approach and try to find, where is God in these instances? They say I've said this before. They say there are two brothers two brothers, a 9-year-old, 7-year-old, and they're known as the troublemakers in town. And they get into everywhere. They're kind always. There's any trouble in the town, we know they know it's these two boys, and they're not the silver boys. And so finally, the mother calls the city rabbi and says, "Can you speak to them? Could you speak to them?" So the rabbi says, "Okay." So he calls in first the 7-year-old, and says, "Josh, where is God?" Josh says he wasn't expecting this. What should he respond? He's quiet. The rabbi this time says a little bit more sternly, "Josh, where is God?" Suddenly, Josh gets up and bolts out of the room, runs home, runs to his brother's room and says, "Sam, we're really in trouble this time. God is missing and they think we did it." So the question is, when God seems to be missing in our lives, but those moments of life, where is God? Where was God at that time? What is the Jewish response? What is the meaning we can take out of it? So before we move into the next class, let's take a stock where we're holding a small recap of the previous classes. So we started off by speaking about the three lower worlds of Biyah, Beria, Yetzira, Asiya. This is the first time where there's any sense of self, any self-independence in the world. Before that, before these three lowest worlds, everything felt God, everything was a part of God. Over here is where we have these three lower worlds, is again a due process, slowly but surely becoming more and more sense of self until we have this world, which again, we don't see God in this world. We can't necessarily, unless you look for it, we seem independent of God. This parallels in the human body, our thought, speech, and action, which is not who we are, which is the garments of our soul. We are able to control it because it's not who we are. Just like these three worlds is not God, it is independent of God. So to our thought, speech, and action are what is independent of us. We're able to control it. Then we moved on to the next class, where we spoke about the world of Atzilut and the 10 Sefirot. This is already a world because it is not fully God, but it is still a part of God. This is already how God becomes defined. God goes from that which is infinite to finite. Already expression. Already, you have the expression of kindness, the expression of severity. How is this in our own lives? We have how God is how in our own lives, how we become already defined. This is a person who is more of a kind person. This is more of a person who is an exacting person. And based upon your soul makeup, you can see this is what your mission in life is. Then we moved on to the Ein Sof, speaking about infinity. You can also follow along in your map, in your course map if you want. We spoke about, on top of that, we have the Keter, which is the Ein Sof, which is the infinite light. This higher light allows all the divine entities to come to peace with one another. This is also spoke about how we're able to have true relationships. We're able to tap into something higher than ourselves. That allows us to be able to connect to one another. And this also we spoke about what is the infinity. What is the infinite in our own psyche is our desires, is our ratzon. That's why our passion is able to shape who we become as people, what we do as people, our intellect, because our ratzon, our desire, our deepest desires, is what parallels that which is the Ein Sof, the infinite. And finally, last week we spoke about the source of the animal soul. We spoke about the Or and the Kalim, the lights in the vessels, and how the lights generally go into the vessels. But because of the light was too powerful in the world of Tohu, the world of chaos, that broke the vessels. It was too strong. And what happens is you have empty vessels. Empty vessels are what come into this world, the negativity of this world, the animalistic urges of this world, of ourselves. And what is the goal in life? The goal in life is tikkun olam, is to be able to fix those empty vessels through infusing meaning into it, through doing a mitzvah with it, that is able to now be able to bring back those broken vessels to its original pure state. What we're going to discuss today is, in order to understand today's discussion, we'll have to review some key terms, which we'll be going back to. So if you take a look at the board, the first one, which we had, is Ein Sof, is God's infinity. This is where God is not defined. Again, remember we asked, could you call God wise? Could you call God kind? And the answer was, Yes and no. Yes, once God becomes in a lower world, in the world of Atzilut, we're already God contracting himself to become finite. But in the Or Ein Sof, that's where God is infinite. That God is above definition. So the first term that we have to remember is the Or Ein Sof, God's infinity. Then we have the Sefirot, the 10 attributes. This is already how God goes from a level of infinite, non-definable, to already become finite. Again, now we already have 10 energies, 10 lights of God. Again, the light of kindness, the light of wisdom, the light of of gevura, of severity. Then we had Elokut, which is an expression of God, not his essential self. This is already how godliness. This is not God himself, but an expression of God. We have Biyah, which is, I mentioned just before, there's 3 spiritual worlds, the lowest 3 worlds. Here's where we already have a sense of self. Here's where we have a sense of independence. And finally, we have Yeshut. Yeshut is the feeling of existence with a self-awareness and independence. In this world, we have Yeshut. I feel independent. I don't feel like I'm God created me, even if that is the truth. So the Yeshut becomes in this lowest world. Now, the question we'll discuss today is, what is this process? Going from, if you see, it goes from the highest and it keeps on going lower. How do we get from Or Ein Sof all the way down to the Yeshut? What is that process? How does that process take place? We spoke in general terms that God contracted himself. God made himself lower. God defined himself. But how did that definition take place? What had to happen in order to reach that place? So, if you remember, we have the shift. The shift again, the yellow. Again, if you have your map, you have the yellow is the Keter. That is where God is infinite. And then we go into the 10 Sefirot. That is already the green zone. How do we get from yellow zone to green zone? And then how do we get from green zone to blue zone? What is the process that needs to take place to go from where God is undefined into definition? How does this transition take place? If you remember, we spoke about that there is gave an example of the genius. The genius that has to condense himself. We spoke about Einstein comes into the classroom and he has to give over something, so he has to condense his knowledge in order to give it over to, the third grader. But how does that happen? What is this process of condensing his knowledge? And that's what we're going to be discussing today. This is in Kabbalah called the tzimtzum, the contraction, the concealment. What? Okay, so but it's more than just summarizing it, because well, let's get there. We'll get there. How exactly what exactly you have to do. And the truth is, this is something which every single one of us does. You may not pay attention to it, but you may have an area of expertise in your life. And when you are speaking to someone who is on a whole different level than you, you're speaking to a child, you may have to condense that knowledge in order to bring out a point to him. And I remember speaking to, I grew up in Detroit, so I remember speaking to someone who was in high school there, and he was on the basketball team in his high school. He was the best on his team. He was the captain. And one time he was able to get some tickets to the Pistons game against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and he was able to get some press tickets to be able to go speak to some of the players after the game. And he tells me that he was able to speak for a minute to a player called LeBron James. You may have heard of him. So, he went to LeBron James and he told him, I'm a basketball player myself. Can you give me a piece of advice, of how to perfect my game? So LeBron tells him, sorry, buddy, it's all talent. That's what LeBron was. Now, whether it's because LeBron was after a long game and he couldn't bother, I don't know. But you would hope that if the challenge is, if you are an expert at something and someone is coming to you and your talent far surpasses them, you are at a whole different level, but you will be able to give something over to them, something real. Not to say it's all talent, you have no connection to it. What is something I can give you? And how do you do that? What is the process of taking something? And again, we're not talking about when you're speaking to a peer. If you're speaking to someone on equal level, even if you know what they don't know, you can just tell them the matter as it is. We're talking about telling something to someone who is at a whole different level. Einstein trying to speak to a third grader. How are they to do that? What is the mechanism to take something which is abstract and condense it? And if we're talking about between human beings, the question is all the more so when we're speaking about God. When we're trying to figure out how God goes from a place of infinite to finite. Now, you could just say God could do anything. Why have this whole discussion? But we want to be able to understand it. We want to be able to have meaning. And as we're speaking about over and over, we mirror God. So the way God goes from his infinite to his finite, we could also gain lessons. If we're able to learn the mechanism how God did it, then we're able to learn, give us practical messages in our world. So to start, let's speak about, throughout world history, there's many examples of a huge shift that happened that was caused by one moment. One moment in history changed history. When we speak about American history, there is, that shot heard around the world. That was something, someone woke up, someone went to sleep 1750 and then woke up 1850, the world would be different. Well, the whole world would, because there was that monumental moment in time where that one moment, the shot, who that shot was actually not that clear. It's debated who fired that shot, but there was that shot. World War I. World War I, again, there was obviously a lot of tension building, but World War I, what was the spark that lit World War I was the assassination of, I believe it was the Archbishop of Austria, Archduke of Austria. That was something that changed history forever. When we speak about Kabbalah, there was also a moment. And again, when we say moment, we don't mean moment in time. Because again, we're talking about a time before there was time. We're talking about a seminal moment that something happened. Something very important had to happen in order to go from that level of infinite to finite. Because again, in order to create this world, we have to leave infinite and come to finite. How did this happen? So in order to understand this, let's turn to text number 1. And this text, while we're going to read it, it's not going to give much clarity without explanation. This is a very important, but also controversial Kabbalistic text, as we'll explain why many people rejected this Kabbalistic text. This is said by Reb Chaim Vital. We spoke about Reb Chaim Vital. He was the main student of the Arizal. He wrote down the Arizal's writing, and he writes as follows. Again, this is a very famous few paragraphs. Before Atzilut was emanated, and before the creations were created, a simple divine light filled all of reality. It had no aspect of beginning or end. It is called Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. So here we have, again, no beginning or no end, like a circle. We have this circle, the circle of light, the beginning. A simple divine light fills all of reality. There was no beginning or end. Again, what's the meaning we can understand from this? What is a circle? There is no top, there's no bottom. There's just one big circle. So too in this place, in this area, there was no beginning or end. There was no definition. Now, when it arose his will to create the worlds and to emanate Atzilut, he contracted his infinite light, and an empty space emerged. So here we have the first, again, what does exactly this means? We'll explain in a moment. He then projected downwards a single straight line from his circular light, devolving into this empty space. Within this empty space, he emanated, created, fashioned, and made all worlds. So the first thing to understand over here is, the first disclaimer is we can't take these terms literally. There was no circles there, but it was, it's metaphorical. And the truth is, when we speak, so much of our speech is metaphorical. So much of our language, we speak about a circle of love. Is there any actual circle? No, it's a metaphor. It's a way of speaking. So when we speak about over here, there was a circle. What is a circle? Circle shows on infinity because there's no beginning, there's no end. There had to be a process of the tzimtzum, that empty space. And then what happens? We have that line, that single straight line. What is different about a line than a circle? A line has a beginning, has an end. A line shows, and that which is finite. So we had to have this process of this contraction. Contracting is infinite light. This empty space, which we'll explain what that means. And then we have this simple straight line that goes downward. So we have the disruption, the tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means the contraction. The tzimtzum enabled a limited projection of godliness. Again, look at the board. First, we have this big divine light. It's all over. Then you have to have first no light, no yellow, no light over there. A complete, seems like God is gone. An empty space, as it says. Until afterwards, we have what's called the kav. The kav is that single line, that divine light, that limited divine light that comes into this world. Now, so what is contraction? Contraction means taking something and making it smaller. So when we speak about contraction of God, we're saying is we're taking godliness, we're taking that which is God, that which is infinite, and making it smaller. You know, here's is a contraction. Here, because here is two words, and I'm contracting by making it into one word. But that's a very simple level. When we speak about contracting the infinite to the finite, there had to be this empty space in order for then a divine light to come into that. Now, what does this mean, and how does this happen? So we will go back to the example of the genius. But yeah, Ross.
Contraction, yes, it's making things small, and yet it's retaining the entirety of divine knowledge.
Okay, that's exactly the point we're going to get to. We're going to get there.
It's condensed.
So we're going to get there. We're going to see what it means when we speak about God condensing himself and contracting himself, what exactly that means. So again, this is a very abstract idea, and far from me to say that I fully understand everything we're speaking about now. Again, it's from the deepest parts of Kabbalah. Oscar Wilde once said that I am so smart that sometimes I don't understand a single word I'm saying. So this is a very complex and deep idea. But on a basic level, in order for God's light, for God's infinite light to come down into this world, there had to be a contraction. There had to be an emptiness. There had to be only once there was this empty space, only then can there be a light for this world. And this brings us to key term number 5.1 and key term 5.2, which we have key term 5.1, 5.2. You have the tzimtzum harisho, the first contraction, the first act of contraction, of concealment, enabling the transition from divine infinity to the divine sephirot. And then you have the kav. The kav is the line, God's manifestation of limited light from which the sephirot arise. Now, I mentioned before, as I was going to start this text, this is a very controversial text, Kabbalistic text. And why is that? Because if you take this text at face value, what does it seem like? It seems like there was a moment of time where God was not there. There was an empty space, it says. Now, can we say about a realm, about a time that God is not found? Let's think about in our world. Is there any space where God is not in? Can we say about a specific, a place of darkness, a place of evil? Is God over there? And you know what? Some people took this idea literally. This is called, again, tzimtzum kipshuta, which means understanding the contraction literally, that there can be places where God is not in. Now, we have to understand that correctly. God observes everything. But they said that God is not in the bathroom, in a dirty place, in an immoral place. But that is not the general accepted way of understanding. So many people took this text and rejected it. What do you mean? You're saying there's an empty space without God? How could you say that? How could you say that, how could you say that there could be a place? And this became a major disagreement amongst Kabbalists. If how to understand the idea of contraction, this empty space, could you say that there is a place without God? Or is God everywhere? Is God all over? They say a thief that breaks into a breaks into a house, and like late at night, suddenly hears a voice. God is watching. He gets all nervous and hears it again. God is watching, and he turns on the light and he sees a parrot. It's a parrot speaking. So he calms down a little bit, and he said, "What?" He said, "What's your name?" So the parrot says, "My name is Moses." He says, "What type of person calls his parrot Moses?" He says, "I don't know. The same type of person who calls his Rottweiler God." So is God watching? Is God all over? And or is there a place where God is not? So again, most people understood that we cannot take this text literally. To say that there is a place that is absent of God, we can't say that. So how do we understand this text? Again, go look back at text number 1. An empty space emerged. It sounds like there was a place without God. So therefore, that brings us to text number 2. Text number 2 was said by Rabbi Yosef Irgas, also a Kabbalist from Italy. And he says as follows: those who wish to understand the Tzimtzum in a literal manner will be led to beliefs that contradict most of the fundamentals of our faith. First of all, we're explicitly taught, to whom do you compare God, and what likeness can you arrange for him? If, however, you take the Tzimtzum literally, you are indeed imposing an image on God as an encompassing circle, an empty space, and a straight channel within that space. The first point he's saying is that if you're going to understand this text literally, that there's a circle, and then there's a space, and then there's a line, again, you're giving God physical features. God doesn't have physical features. So that's the first reason he's saying you cannot understand this text in a literal way. But then he goes on and says, beyond the physical connotations, we can't understand the text to say there is any place which is absent of God. And that's what he goes on in text 2b. Additionally, the Zohar states numerous times that there is no place where he is not, from the highest of levels to the lowest of levels, and in every direction. If you suggest that the Tzimtzum is literal, Tzimtzum means the contraction, you are insinuating that there is a place devoid of him, for in his empty space, only a narrow channel descended. So therefore, how can we understand? So if we can't understand this text as literal, in other words, we cannot understand that there's a place absent of God. So what is text number 1, which is, again, describing how we go from a place of infinity to this world, to a finite world? How do we understand this empty space if, again, God is everywhere? There's no place which is devoid of God. So what does it mean God created this empty space? Yes?
Why do people use the expression like for example, silent?
Okay. I believe after we give the answer, perhaps that will give some clarification on what we mean when we say godless. Okay, so give me 10 minutes and then we'll revisit the question. I believe the question will be answered. Oh, okay. Very good. So in Kabbalah, one of the key points of Kabbalah is Gilui and Helam. Again, I know I'm saying a lot of Hebrew words, and you also have it in the back of your map in the key words. Gilui means that which is revealed. Helam means that which is hidden. Now, you could have something which is there but hidden. Not just because I don't see something means that it's not there. You can have something which is present in a revealed way. I see it. And then you can have something which is present, yet in a hidden way. When we speak about that God is not, there's an empty space, we don't mean God is not there. Can't say that about God. What we mean is God is there in a hidden type of way. So go back, I'll go back to your question right now. When we speak about a place that is godless, when we speak about immorality, which there's no God there, we don't mean that God is not there. What we mean, God is there in a very hidden way. There's no expression of God over there. You cannot see God, there's no presence of God in a revealed way that we can appreciate. God is, the more immoral, the more godless it is, the more God is hidden from such a place. But we cannot say that God is not in such a place, because God is everywhere. And God is everywhere equally. God's not revealed everywhere equally. God is revealed in certain places more than others. A shul God is more revealed in a shul than out in the street. Now, in the temple, God is more revealed than in a shul. You have different levels of revelation.
Those two places where we say he's hiding and he is present.
Well, what do you mean by why is, in other words, why is God's presence more revealed in a shul? Is because people come here to pray to God and they recognize God. So that's what makes it more present. So it's not like God decided that's going to be more present here. If they would be in another place, not in the shul, if people more gathered to learn Torah or discuss God in a street corner, that would be a place which is God is more revealed. It does practically, what does revelation of God mean for us? It means when people are living in a place recognizing God. So now generally, a shul, you hope, will have a more revealed sense of God. Because again, that's the purpose people are coming to shul. So let's take a look at text number 3. Which the text number 3, we have this idea of revelation versus concealment, this concept as it comes to God. And everyone's familiar with this story. The tzimtzum does not mean that God's infinite light departed, God forbid. For in truth, there is no place devoid of him. This is an important rule to know. There is no place in this world, there's no place in your life that is ever devoid of God. This principle is also expressed in the Medrash. Why did God choose to reveal himself to Moses, from within a thorn bush? To teach that there is no place devoid of God's presence, even in a thorn bush. Again, we have to appreciate that's a very profound statement. A thorn bush represents that which hurts, that which is dark, that which is struggle. Imagine your own life, those times of life which you felt like you were in a thorn bush. And what we're saying is there is no place devoid of God. Even in those moments in life, God was with you. Now, you may have not felt God. You may have said, where is God? God was hidden then, but God is there. Instead, in this context, the meaning of tzimtzum is that Or Ein Sof went from a state of revelation to one of concealment without actually departing at all. So this is the first important idea to recognize. When we speak about tzimtzum, we do not mean tzimtzum literally, that God contracts himself and God is no longer there. There's empty space without any God. Well, the way we have to understand it, God hides himself. How do we understand this? How does God hide himself? So let's speak about the process for a moment of how God hides himself, which hopefully will bring a little bit of clarity. Let's go back. Let's go back to the example. Back to the example, the parable we've been bringing all this time of the genius. The genius is going again. Let's speak about Sir Isaac Newton. A different name today. Isaac Newton is going to a classroom, and he needs to relate to the third grader, the fourth grader, to be able to explain to him the concept of gravity with all the mathematical equations. Now, if he speaks to him on his level, the child will just look at him with an open mouth, not knowing anything he's going to say. So, yeah, it's all down. That's what that would the response be. So, how does the genius actually contract himself? What is the process to conceal his breadth of knowledge in order to be able to then speak to the child? And Kabbalah tells us like this. Kabbalah tells us in order to be able to, for this genius to relate to the child, he has to conceal his entire knowledge, everything he knows about the topic, even to himself. He has to start from a blank state, from a blank piece of paper, and find that one area where he could convey something over here and relate it to the child. In other words, if he's going to, in his mind, the whole time, be having the full knowledge, he tries to convey it over, it's going to go way above the child's head. The genius has to think for a moment, let me make a blank space. Let me forget everything I know for a second. Let me find that one area where I can relate this child. Well, let's speak about gravity. Sir Isaac Newton says, I am going to now forget all the mathematical equations for a second, and I am going to speak about the child, how chalk goes on a chalkboard, which is an idea from gravity. If the genius is able to do that, only then will he be able to convey the idea to the child. This is tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means that when you are concealing the breadth of your knowledge in order to find out one area which you can convey further. Let me give you another example. If I know nothing about cars. So if I open up the hood, if I open up the hood of a car, I just see a bunch of pipes and a bunch of things. I have no idea what's happening. Now, if a mechanic tries to speak to me and just tells me with all his knowledge of everything, again, I'll be lost. So what does that mechanic have to do? He wants to explain to me. I'm that clueless child when it comes to these things. He has to find that one area in that hood where he can explain to me, convey it to me. So he's hiding all his knowledge. He is, so to say, in that moment, forgetting all his knowledge to convey that one point to me. And only then will I be able to appreciate that. This is the idea of the tzimtzum. So what the novelty over here is that wisdom, when I conceal that wisdom, is this still within me? It's still within me. It's just for that moment, in order to convey that idea to a child, to someone way beneath me, I concealed it within me, but it was always there. So too, when we speak about the tzimtzum, what we're saying is that God decided he wants to become finite. Now, finite is a part of God. But as it's a part of God, it's amongst everything else. You have, again, it's under the hood of the car. You have finite as one of the things, plus everything else. If God wanted to convey any sense to us, have a relationship with us, God had to hide everything else. Had to go to that level of contraction, concealment, in order to then be able to contract himself to become finite so we could have a relationship with him. And this, understanding this, I'll get to you in a second, understanding this, that God, there was never a place which was devoid of God. God just concealed himself. It actually can be a sense of comfort. When a person is going through a hard time, even if you don't understand why it's happening, and the pain is still there. But just knowing that God is with you in those moments, going back to what Helena was saying, just having that faith in God itself is a source of comfort. My grandmother was a survivor, would always say, when she was in the camps, God, where's God at that time? And she was in deep pain. She lost her whole family. But somehow she said she felt God was with her. And that's what allowed her to go through the camps. If someone is able to go through life recognizing that even in the greatest tzimtzum, even in the greatest concealment, God is there, just God is not in a revealed sense. God is in a hidden sense. This is then, that itself can be a source of comfort. And this is the tzimtzum. Yeah.
Rarely ever question the presence of God. But I question his unwillingness to reveal his image.
Right. So
I know he's there, but why aren't you doing this or doing
that? So that we don't have an answer to. And what we're not going to be discussing today is why bad things happen. Why there is that? Why does sometimes God choose to conceal himself? Maybe we'll touch upon that at the end of the lesson. But what we're discussing right now is that to recognize, even in that place of darkness, even in that place of contraction, where God is hidden, God is still there in his full breadth. Just like that genius who is contracting himself still has that full breadth of knowledge. It's just he's hiding that in order to convey something to the student. Let's take a look at text 4a, which brings out, yes.
Am I understanding that the all I'm soft is in fact a contraction again?
No. Or Ein Sof is the infinite. In order to go from infinite, which is Or Ein Sof, down to Atzilut, which is the first level where there is some sense of finiteness, of the 10 of the Chesed Gevura, you have kindness already, how God is defined. You have to have some sort of contraction. God is making that empty space in order to then be able to have that line, that Kab we mentioned, that more defined level of godliness, which then can ultimately create this world. Or Ein Sof is before the contraction. Then the contraction leads from Or Ein Sof to a place of, on your chart, from the yellow zone to the green zone. How do you get, again, back to your map, from the yellow zone to the green zone? You have to have that symptom, that contraction. Let's take a look at text 4a. Consider the example of a teacher imparting information to students. The profound concepts the teacher understands is incompatible with the student's mental abilities. True, the profound concepts contains less significant elements that are compatible with the student's minds. Nevertheless, in the teacher's minds, these elements are filled with the profundity of the overall concept, and they therefore remain too deep to deliver to the students. Again, as it's in the mind, as Isaac Newton is thinking about the chalk on the chalkboard, it's in a lot greater way than the way a third grade, an 8-year-old will understand that, because he's understanding it based on all the mathematical equations that go behind it. So it's a lot more profound, even these simple ideas. The main obstacle here is that there's no distinction in the teacher's mind between the core of the concepts and its less significant elements. Consequently, if the teacher proceeds to transmit this knowledge to the students, the teacher will deliver the full profundity along with the less significant components. The students will understand none of it. Again, if the teacher is going to say it all according to his knowledge with all the depth, the student will get nothing. It will be like LeBron saying, it's all talent. I can't tell you anything. So what does the teacher have to do? The solution is for the teacher to conceal the entire concept, mentally pushing the whole idea aside to approach it anew. The teacher can now distinguish between the idea's core and the more superficial elements. The teacher can then deliver the transmittable details without flooding these elements with the overwhelming complexity of the core concepts. This is the idea of tzimtzum. And again, the way it's done by a teacher to a student is the way God had to do it to go from infinite to finite. If God would shine the light of his infinity, everything that's going on there to this world, it would be like a student, we can't get anything. We'd be overwhelmed with God's light. So God had to conceal the tzimtzum, the entire concept. And only then can God convey an idea over to us. Just like that teacher has to conceal, even in his own mind, to then find that one area he can address and give it over to the student. So let's take a look again and again, I recognize this abstract area. This is from the deepest areas of Kabbalah, but even to come out with some understanding of it. So let's take a look at figure 5.1, or you can see on the slide. There is the way in the parable, and there is the way in the analog. Again, in the parable, a genius has an abstract idea that's beyond ordinary students. Again, you have a genius who comes completely beyond them. The abstract idea has a minor implication that is relatable. Again, the chalk on the chalkboard. Again, we have the full idea of gravity with all the mathematical equations, and then that a third grader can't understand. But a third grader can understand the idea how if you put chalk on a chalkboard, you'll have some chalk there. That's the minor detail. Yeah, info, yes. This minor implication is still part of the unattainable idea. Again, if the teacher is going to try to convey the concept of chalk on the chalkboard, but the way he understands it, in all its depth and all its complexities, still the student will be able to understand it, because he's still giving it over in a way which is way too deep and complex for the student. So what does he have to do? The abstract idea is removed from the genius's conscious thinking, and then this minor implication becomes discoverable and can be shared. Again, the genius has to now hide everything, all his knowledge, for the sake of finding that one area we can now convey to that student. Now let's bring it down to the analog. We're speaking about Kabbalah and God going from infinite to finite. An infinite light filled all of reality with no room for a finite expression. God's infinity includes the power to be finite. Within God's power of infinity, remember we spoke about this, I believe it was lesson 3, saying if you're going to say God cannot be finite, then you're actually taking away from God's limitedness. You're saying God is finite by the fact he can't be finite. So therefore, God also has the ability to contract, to become finite. However, this power to be finite is still part of divine infinity. In other words, while still an Or Ein Sof, it's still above and beyond having any relationship with us, and we can handle that. So what does God have to do? This is where the tzimtzum comes in. God conceals his infinite light, and then God projects his finite power into this space of concealment. And the truth is, we all do this. I mean, we don't think of the whole process as we're doing this. But if any of you have ever spoken, whether it's because you have an area of expertise and you're trying to explain it, or you're speaking to a child, you don't have to do this when you're speaking to a peer. When you're speaking to someone on equal IQ as you, and someone you're able to just give over the whole concept as you know it, that's not Tzimtzum. That's just conveying an idea. But if you have to speak, when I speak to my children, I have to do the process of Tzimtzum. If I want to speak to them and explain them something, I have to conceal my knowledge to be able to now bring it down and find the area where I can relate to them. And now the Tzimtzum I do when I speak to my Mendel I don't have to do the Tzimtzum as much as when I do that and I have to speak to my 2-year-old, myself. The further the gap between the two people, the greater the Tzimtzum will have to be. So when we're speaking about going from the infinite to the finite, we have to have this very powerful level of Tzimtzum. But this doesn't mean when I'm speaking to my Mendel, when I'm speaking to myself, even as I'm contracting myself, it doesn't mean I lost my wisdom. I'm just hiding it right now in order to convey this idea. This is the idea of the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is divine light fills all of reality. This was the Or Ein Sof, where it's all infinite. Divine light was revealed. But again, it's way above and beyond us. So then God makes a dark place. God contracts it. What does it mean God contracts it? This is good taking from the text number 1. God concealed it. Doesn't mean that God wasn't there, God forbid. God was there, but just in a way of concealment. And then you have God projected a single straight line. And this is the process of the Tzimtzum. Any questions? Any questions or comments? Okay, so we are going to now go on. We are going to go watch a lesson video, which hopefully will take this concept that we've said just now and maybe make it a little bit clearer as a sort of review.
Welcome to our 5th video on the world of Kabbalah, a journey through the mystical layers of the Kabbalistic system. We previously described the disparity between God's infinite light and the 10 Sfirot of Atzilut that have definitions and distinctions, and therefore limitations. How can absolute infinite divinity give way to a finite form of divinity, the 10 Sfirot? The transition cannot be gradual because it's impossible for infinity to devolve into something finite. So what enabled such a drastic leap? The good news is that 16th century Rabbi Yitzchak Luria explained this puzzle. The bad news is that it's a complex topic, so we'll just give a sample here. The idea is called Tzimtzum, which means contraction. God contracted his infinite light, disrupting its infinity to support the emergence of the finite Sfirot. The Kabbalists used metaphoric imagery. God pushed aside the light to form an empty void, into which he beamed a single straight light of illumination that devolved into the cosmos. Now, if that's not mysterious, nothing is. So let's clarify. The Tzimtzum did not remove God from anywhere or anything. So what did it achieve? Well, if you recall, in an earlier video, we described a scientist struggling to share an abstract, complex theory with teenage minds. He's forced to pause and rethink his presentation. After identifying a relatable detail within the theory, he shares just that detail with the students, who are blown away at the genius of it. It took the scientist time and effort to identify the detail. Why is that? Because the detail was lost in the forest of the complex theory. It didn't have its own identity. So how did he identify it? He stopped focusing on the theory. The idea remained in his mind, but he decreased the intensity of his focus, which created the mental space to hone in on a minor detail. That's the Tzimtzum. Nothing is impossible for God. He has both the ability to be infinite and to be finite. The difference is that his infinity is naturally revealed. That's the infinite light. While his ability to be finite is lost in the background, like the scientific detail overlooked in the context of a complex theory. Just as the scientist reduced his focus on the entire theory to allow a detail to become visible, so did God reduce the focus on his infinite power to allow his finite power to operate. So when the Kabbalists say that God made an empty space for creation, it's not actual space and it's not actually empty. It's a shift between two layers of divine focus. And when they talk of a single straight line, they mean God's ability to be finite, which is what allowed the 10 Sfirot, finite forms of divinity, to emerge. How is that relevant to us? We exist thanks to the process of Tzimtzum. But the Tzimtzum is not a true withdrawal, just a concealment of focus. So even when we feel that God is withdrawn from our world, it pays to remember that we remain within God's infinite light, although it's concealed from our perception. Knowing that makes it easier to personally relate to God. And the fact that God initiated this drastic step of Tzimtzum to make space for our existence should inspire us to create space for His presence in our lives. After all, it's just a matter of focus.
Okay, so this is the idea of Tzimtzum. Now, again, if you're a little bit confused, don't worry. Many greater Kabbalists than you have been confused by this concept. And again, this is from the more abstract ideas. But again, just to take the basic idea, in order from God to go from the Ein Sof, the infinite, down to already becoming finite, there had to be that Tzimtzum, that contraction. And what is contraction? Not that God is removing himself, but concealing himself in the way that, like, in order to get to a certain area, you have to conceal everything else to then project that line. In order to be able to speak to a child, you have to contract yourself in order to convey that one idea. Now, what I want to say quickly is that there is another type of tzimtzum. And I don't want to get too lost in track over here, but there's another type of tzimtzum, another type of contraction. And what is that? Because until now, we've been talking about how to get from Ein Sof, from the infinite, to what? To the finite Tatzilot, the 10 Sefirot. But if you remember, the 10 Sefirot are still a part of God. There's still godliness. How do you get to this world? Or if you have your map, we discussed how you get from yellow to green. How do you get from green to blue? Blue is our world. Blue is a world where there's a sense of self. So we had to have another tzimtzum. And this tzimtzum is called the parsa. Again, what is the shift? How did this transition take place? Again, going from the world, again, till now we're discussing the first tzimtzum. That's why it's called the first contraction. To get from infinite to finite. But in this first step of finite, it's still godliness. It's just how godliness is already defined by being kind, by being wise. How do we take that next step of being God, coming into this world? Again, God created this world. God's in this world. But this world is, can we sense God? Is God, it seems like a place, a sense of self. Is it a place of independence of God? So this Kabbalah calls the parsa. What does parsa mean? Parsa means a curtain. Let's take a look at text number 5, of text number 5. We'll read the first part because the second part is a little more complicated. But the first part of text number 5, page number 153. In his Eitz Chaim, Reb Chaim Vital discusses a dividing curtain between Atzilut and Beria. This curtain is a concealing garment that enables the creation of entities with a sense of independence. It is comparable to a physical screen that conceals light. Although some light succeeds in piercing the barrier, that light is merely a secondary product of the original light. What does this mean? Very simple. What is the difference between if I have a room and there is a small hole in the window and the light's coming through that hole, or if I have a room and I have a curtain going over the window and the light's going through the curtain? What's the difference? When you have the hole, I'm not getting the full light of the sun, but the light that does come in, that's directly the sunlight. As opposed to the curtain, what the light itself is changing. It's filtered. If I have a green, if I have a colored shade, the light will come and will mimic that color. It's not just in the first instance, it's a quantity difference. It's quantitatively smaller light. When we're talking about the curtain, it's a qualitatively different light. Now the light's actually changing. So Kabbalah tells us that in order, the first symptom to go from infinite to finite, from Or Ein Sof to Atzilut, but Atzilut is still a part of God. There, God made his light smaller. Again, he made an empty space and he made one small hole for the light to go in. But that light is still the same light. Like the hole in the window. You have the same sunlight. It's godliness. And that's why Atzilut is still godliness. But in order to come from the green zone to the blue zone, down to this world where we don't sense godliness, what did we need? We couldn't just have a smaller amount of light. We had to have a different type of light. That's the curtain. That's where God's light that's coming in is qualitatively different. It's a different type of light. The light itself changes. There is that screen. There is that filter. And now, once we have that, we're able to come into this world. We're able to have a world where I don't sense God. I have a sense of self. Again, and in Bria, you have a lesser sense of self, Yitzira, till we get to this world of Asiya, which again, we all feel independent of God. Unless we study, unless we learn, but naturally we feel independent of God. Because this is what the Tzimtzum, and again, this next level of Tzimtzum, of Parsa, of the curtain, does, it changes the light of God. It doesn't just make it smaller. Again, the first Tzimtzum is making the light smaller. The next Tzimtzum to get to this world, to get from the green zone to the blue zone, it's not just making the light smaller, it's changing the actual light. It's making a curtain behind it. Now the light, the energy of God, is coming down in a filtered way. It's not just smaller, it's also weaker. I wouldn't even say weaker. It's different. It's how light undergoes a change, unless that's what you mean when you say weaker. It's the light itself is going under a change. Okay, which leads us. Any questions, comments? Okay, so that brings us to the practical. Again, we said every single class will have the practical. Hopefully, this will be a little bit more in our world. A takeaway, a powerful takeaway, two powerful takeaways that we are able to bring into our own life. And the first is that God, in order to make a relationship with us as human beings, what did God need to do? God needed to create. Let's go over here. The parsa, we have the light is altered. By contrast, the light isn't altered. Yeah, when you have over here, the bottom one, again, you maybe have small light, you have black around, but it's the same light. When you have the parsa, the curtain, the light itself is altered. Okay, but going back to the takeaway, God wanted to make a relationship with us. What did God have to do? God had to do tzimtzum. God had to make an empty space in order to be able to have a relationship with us. This idea is so true and so profound when it comes to our relationships with others and with Hashem. If we want to be able to make an authentic relationship with someone else, you first have to remove yourself. You first have to contract yourself, hide yourself a little bit. Take yourself out of the picture. Listen to them. So often when we speak to someone else, when we're in a relationship with someone else, it's about me. It's about what I'm going to get out of it. What God told us through the creation of this world is in order to be able to have a relationship with someone, you have to put yourself on the back burner and listen to that person. Appreciate that person for who they are. Just like God did that in order to create this finite world to have a relationship with us. I don't think I said it during this course, but I've said this story before. This parable. They say that there was a fish that was frolicking in the ocean, going its merry way, and suddenly gets caught. And all frightened, but suddenly he hears the fisherman say, "What a great fish! I'm so happy. The king loves fish." So now the fish is happy. The king loves fish. He'll take good care of me and all that. Okay, so he's still put in a bucket and he's coming and comes to the palace and he sees the guard. The guard up. wow, the king loves fish. So again, a grin goes across the fish's mouth, and all happy that he's going to take care of me. He loves me. Finally comes to the kitchen, and the chef. Wow, what a fish! The king loves fish, and now at this point, the fish is thrashing about. Suddenly, it sees the chef taking the knife, about to cut it open, and the fish calls out. The king doesn't love fish. The king loves himself. And the depth of the story is so often we speak about a love to someone else. You don't love that other person. You love yourself. What will that person do for me? What can I gain out of that? What can I get out of this relationship? In order to have an authentic relationship, if I really wanted to tune into someone else, I have to be willing to go through a tzimtzum. I have to be able to make space for someone else. Remove yourself a little bit and allow someone else in. As long as you're focused about me in the picture, a relationship is not a true relationship. And that's why someone who is someone who's a true narcissist can't have a real relationship, because everything is about me. Everything is about what I'm in the picture. In order to be able to relate to others, we have to go through the tzimtzum. We have to be able to tame our ego. If we find ourselves taking up all available space, a self-imposed tzimtzum is warranted. It will provide space for others to thrive around us. Let's take a look at text 6a, which is a very powerful, very cute story, but a very powerful idea. Those who are self-obsessed and narcissistic become engrossed in their desires and wishes and completely forget about God. Similarly, their self-obsession precludes loving others. Their self-love generates divisiveness because it doesn't allow them to tolerate others. They think that whatever someone else says or does is directed against them. There was an incident that well illustrates this point. A fellow who happened to be a tremendous scholar and well-versed in Torah once had a private audience, Yechidut, with my great-grandfather, Rabbi Nachum Mendel of Lubavitch. Rebbe, he complained, the others are stepping all over me in the study hall. They do not appreciate what I have to say. They do not behave properly towards me. And they do almost the exact opposite of my opinion. Now, if you were to get this question, what would you respond? There's many different ways of responding. You know what you should do, but the response of the Rebbe, I believe, is very unique and very informative. The Holy Rebbe replied, "Your ego expands throughout the entire study hall. Wherever anyone steps is bound to be on you." This person was complaining, "I feel everyone's stepping all over me." So the Rebbe responded, "So why are you all over? To be stepped on?" In other words, if the way you frame everything around you is about me, then yes, you're bound to always feel like this person is stepping on me, because you never went through a tzimtzum. And I remember one time hearing master negotiator, someone who helps people and negotiates, and he said something very simple but very profound. And he said, most people generally, when they think and when they interact with this world, the spotlight is always on them. What the other people, what it means to them, how I'm going to be affected by this, what I'm going to do, what you're going to do, how's it going to affect me? What you guys are arguing about? What do I think about this? He says, when it comes to, he was saying, as my job as a negotiator, I have to work on putting the spotlight on the other people, not think about myself. Create that tzimtzum to be able to focus on other people. And this is the idea of the tzimtzum, to be able to hide ourselves to hear someone else. We often hear, this person's a good listener. What do you mean a good listener? Has extra hearing? What does a good listener mean? Good listener means that they have the ability to really listen to you, not just put themselves in the equation, but figure out who you are. Put themselves on the side for a minute. One of the many people who share about their encounter with Lubavitcher Rebbe. Again, I'm too young to really have that. I met the Rebbe, I was too young to remember. But many people, and you have this from the most simple people to the greatest, the most profound people. One of the things you hear over and over again, and again, the Rebbe was someone who met thousands, tens of thousands of people a year. But they felt they would often say, when I was in his presence, I felt I was the only one that mattered. I was the only one, and it was all about me. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about the Rebbe, about what his busy schedule was. I was the focus of attention. And this is the idea of the tzimtzum. To relate to others, you have to contract yourself. You have to hide yourself. Put yourself on the side, focus on another person. And while this is true in our relationship to others, it's also true in our relationship to Hashem. If my relationship to Hashem is all about what God could do for me, if my relationship to Hashem is about, I have a shopping list. God, I need this, this, and this. I pray for this, this, and this. Now, that person is a person of faith. He believes in God. If he's praying every day and saying, so the person does have faith, but it's a severely lacking relationship because it's about me. It's not about what we can do for each other. A relationship with Hashem is, what can I do for you, God? In other words, why was I created? What's my mission in this world? Now, part of a relationship is also what you'll do for me. So part of a relationship with Hashem, and again, a part of prayer is asking for our needs. So it's not a negative thing to ask for our needs. But if that is the subtotal of our relationship with Hashem, that's not a relationship. That's, going in a relationship with someone else, and it's all about me. So the first message, the first takeaway from the tzimtzum is to put yourself on the side. Hide yourself a little bit, contract yourself a little bit. And this is both when we are relating to others or relating to Hashem. And this problem, often people don't do this, is perhaps even greater. You find this more by, so to say, greater people, by people who have a higher stature. They have a hard time putting themselves on the side. And this is we see in text 6b, continues the story. You will notice that the above story mentions that the individual felt like people were stepping all over him in the study hall. This is a highly instructive detail because a hall designated for Torah study is considered a miniature holy temple. Divinity is more acutely present and perceptible in a place filled with Torah study, similar to that presence of divinity within the holy temple. Despite that, again, this guy was in a holy place. Despite this individual succeeded in maintaining a bloated ego, even in this holy place. This detail of the story was included to underscore that knowledge alone, without working on self-refinement, is woefully insufficient. So much so that one's ego will infiltrate even a miniature sanctuary. This proves the indispensability of avoda, the internal work of character refinement. So the first message, the first takeaway, when we speak about tzimtzum, is to have that knowledge, have that ability to put ourselves on the side, make space for someone else. It's not always about us. It's about having a relationship with others and Hashem. And the way to do that is through the tzimtzum.
Is it ever about us?
I mean, the greatest person, we spoke about last week, the animal soul and the godly soul. If you're living purely by the godly soul, then no, it's all about what I have to do. But again, that's a very high level. We're human beings, and generally we do also want to have, generally our default state is all about us. So the avoda, which we said over here, the work in life, the goal in life is to go less about me and more about others, and more about God. Now, will we be able to get all the way there? I mean, that's what the tzaddik is. The tzaddik, the most righteous of people, gets there. Most people are somewhere in between. Most people are somewhere on the spectrum. Yes, while we do enjoy for ourselves as well, but again, the practice and the work in life is supposed to become less self and more others. The second, yes.
Being very humble. Because being humble, you are retracting yourself, so he was able to have a relationship with God.
Yeah. Exactly. Moshe, that's a great point. Moshe was the most humble person, and the more humble you are, the more of a relationship you could have. And that's why Moshe had the closer relationship with Hashem. Because again, the more you're able to put yourself on the side, the more you're able to tap into someone else. The more I have myself clouding, myself in the way, so the less genuine, the less authentic my relationship will be. Because again, there's also me cloud in the way. So, and again, as we're saying throughout, it's not all or nothing. It's a spectrum. And the point of life is to be able to be a little bit less about self and a little bit more about Hashem, a little bit more about others. Yeah. And let's go to the second takeaway. The second takeaway of this idea of tzimtzum And that is that the process, we started off by speaking about what is the Kabbalistic approach about people who go through struggle in life, people who go through pain in life, those tough moments, both as an individual and as a people, as a Jewish people as a whole. And what Kabbalah tells us, and again, this is not to say that we're going to have all the answers, and especially when we speak about the worst, the most challenging situations, we're not going to have all the answers. But the process of Tzimtzum tells us, well, again, what was the process of Tzimtzum? There was darkness, there was absence, and what did the Tzimtzum lead to? To light. The darkness led, again, there where God hid himself, and once God hid himself, that allowed the light to come forward. This is how God created this world. And now, again, God created this world, the light comes after darkness. And this is instructive in our life. When we're going through a time of darkness, when we're going through a time of pain, we have to recognize that this is the process of creation of this world, and this is the process we mirror God in our lives. The light comes after the darkness. We find this in Jewish philosophy, and we find this in Jewish history. What is the Jewish birth? Pesach. Pesach is a Jewish birth. That comes after slavery. That comes after 210 years of darkness. Only then we have the birth, we have that light. Now, this doesn't mean I can see this in every area, but the concepts exist. It's important to recognize that. Hanukkah is in a couple days. Hanukkah is the holiday of lights. Hanukkah came right after a very difficult time, a very great darkness. Similar, sorry? Purim too. We have all the holidays. It's a light that comes after the darkness. This is the similar idea to the Tzimtzum, how existed by Hashem. And this is interesting. When we speak about the Jewish day, when does the Jewish day start? At night. Why is the first night and then day? It follows this same pattern. First, you have darkness, which then leads light. Let's take a look at text number 8. There was evening and there was morning. One day. And God says first there was evening, then the morning, then the first day. This verse informs us that there is no day without a night that precedes it. Why must it be so? Why does a day not exclusively consist of daylight hours, or perhaps just the night hours? Why must it include both evening and morning, and why must night precede the day? The root of the matter is that at the source of creation, there was an evening before morning. That is, darkness preceded light. For the Tzimtzum preceded the sharing of God's kindness. This darkness-light combination extends to all the worlds, including our world, where night precedes day. Yeah, we have darkness before light. Where is the first divine move? We call it an act geared towards creation. So we have concealment for the sake of revelation. And that's what continues in 8b. We observe the same pattern, reflected in the fears of this world, whereby individuals who do not achieve growth in wealth, leadership, building a family, study, or any other accomplishment without first experiencing humiliation, pain, loss, and the like. For example, individuals engaged in study will not arrive at a complete understanding of the subject without much toil and stress, feeling distant from understanding and tempted to despair from mastering the subject. Indeed, the Talmud states, one does not understand statement of Torah without first being mistaken. We observe the same in earning a livelihood, whereby we succeed only after putting forth great effort and enduring much pain, even feeling despair. Only thereafter do we find profit and great blessing. That comes to mind just the other day. I was working with my Mendel. We're working on riding a two-wheeler bike, and he's just getting frustrated. He's crying, and he can't do it, and he keep on falling. And I tell him, if you give up now, you're just not going to do it. I keep on going, and after a little while, he got it. He was able to do it now, and he was the happiest boy. Over there, you have, in order to get to the happiness, the skill of being able to ride a two-wheeler, he went through pain, he went through suffering. It was hard for him. Again, obviously, in a 7-year-old child, that's pain, that's suffering. He kept on falling. But in order to get to that, he had to go through that struggle. If he wouldn't go through the struggle, he wouldn't be riding a two-wheeler today. That's the process of creation. This is the way that God's blessing flow in the upper worlds and travel down to the lowest realms. There is no light without the darkness that precedes it. As it is stated, according to the pain is the reward. So we have a reflection of the Tzimtzum pattern. We have the earth was dark, and only afterwards, let there be light. A day start, the halachic day begins in the evening. Because again, in order to be able to have the morning, you have to have an evening. Now again, this is not to say they'll have all the answers in life, of all the painful moments in life. And sometimes the most painful moments, we'll never be able to see the light afterwards. But to understand that this was the process of creation. One of the things that has become popular in the past, 10, 20, 30 years in psychology is, the idea of PTSD, post-traumatic stress, is something which is well known for many, many years. But there's something else, and that is called, there's mounting evidence, there's something called post-traumatic growth. That when a person goes through an area of trauma, an area of suffering, there can be a growth that comes out of that. You have the ability to be able to interact with others in a better way, in a healthier way. Someone who goes through an illness, a cancer survivor is often able to now appreciate this world and life so much more because they realize the value of every second. They were only able to come to that appreciation through the tzimtzum, the darkness that preceded it. This is the concept of tzimtzum, the darkness which leads to a light. One example of this idea is the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who lived in communist Russia. And he was the leader of the underground movement of spreading Torah and mitzvos, even when it was outlawed. And him and his followers went through tremendous suffering. He was arrested, and he was, originally was sentenced to death. But he went through, and by a whole series, America got involved. He was released eventually, but he went through tremendous suffering. One example, in prison, he entered into prison as a healthy person, and he came out as a broken person. They tortured him. There was one account was that they threw him down a staircase. Went through tremendous suffering, and he said a very profound statement: the post-traumatic growth, adversity often leads to a renewed sense of purpose. But you take a look at what he said. I'll put this on the screen, but you also have this in text number 9. I can't say this, and I don't know if most people could say this. But he said as follows: if someone would offer to sell me a single moment of additional suffering for $1 billion, I would not buy. But if someone would offer to purchase a single moment of my past suffering for $1 billion, I would not sell. What a powerful statement. Yes, we don't look for suffering. He wasn't looking to have any more suffering. He wouldn't, the suffering he went through, he wouldn't buy for $1 billion. But once he went through that suffering, once he was able to go through it, he said, I wouldn't sell that for $1 billion. Now I'm able to appreciate what it did for me, the growth I got from it afterwards. The second idea of tzimtzum is that darkness leads to light. Now, in the actual moment of going through the pain, you often times won't see it. The Pirkei Avos also tells us, when a person, it says, don't comfort someone while the death of their dead is right in front of them. And the Pirkei Avos is saying, in the height of the moment, in the grief, to try to explain it to someone, that's also inappropriate. But as time goes on, as you're able to look back, very often you're able to see in your own lives that times of darkness was the precursor to light. And while this may be a statement that's out there in the world, but we see it has Kabbalistic origins. Kabbalistically, to get to the place of light, to get to the place of where God created this world, there had to first be this sense of darkness. And I'll just finish off with, as a Jewish people right now, we're going through a very hard time. We're going through a time of trauma. And, especially what happened a couple of, 6 weeks ago, and really continuing till now. And it's very easy to look at the darkness and why did this happen? And no one's going to be able to claim they know why such a thing happened and the answers. There's such brutality and such evil in there. But what I do believe we are already starting to see is the light that's coming out of there. So many people, and you hear this by so many survivors of the Nova Festival who are saying, it was a moment in their life which changed them. Now they're able to appreciate this world. Now the Jewish people are coming together. Yes, we have people that hate us and people don't understand us, but there's a certain unity out there. There are so many people who are becoming closer to Hashem. So again, this is not to say we can understand the suffering that happened, but we are able to see this process of darkness, which ultimately leads to light. And this is the second idea. So again, we spoke about today, we spoke about the in creation, there had to, in order to go from the infinite to the finite, we had to be able to, God had to contract himself, to be able to remove himself. Again, God will always be there, but hide himself, to then be able to take that one idea, that finite idea, to create this world. Just like that genius has to hide themselves in order to be able to take that one idea to convey to that child. And how it mirrors itself in our world is in order to be able to have a relationship. Again, God made that to have a relationship with us. In order to have a relationship, we have to do the tzimtzum, put ourselves on the side, be able to say, it's not about me. I'm hiding myself. What can I do for you? Why? What can I, where are you in the picture? And also in relationship to Hashem. And finally, when we go through struggle, when we go through the dark moments in life, when we go through those moments of life where it seems like, where is God? So first, we have to remember God is always there. God is never gone. God may be hidden, but there's no place devoid of God. But also remember that in every place of darkness, ultimately, that leads to the light. Just like God's darkness, God concealing himself, led to the light of this world, so too in our lives, when we go through, and everyone goes through hardships. And again, even if you can't find it by the greatest hardships you go through, the greatest struggle, but if I find lesser challenges, find those areas where that symptom, that darkness led to the light. And ultimately, this is the goal of life, to be able to find those moments where, find those areas where we could have those post-traumatic growth, be able to go through those hardships and be able to find that growth, find that light that comes out of that. There you go. Okay. Thank you all. And again, I mentioned at the beginning, but some of you weren't here yet. We're not going to have class next week. It's going to be Hanukkah. The last class number 6, is going to be the following week after Hanukkah, which I believe is December 18th. Okay. Have a great evening, everyone. Yes. Everyone's welcome to take a look at the dreidel outside in the back. You can see the frame of it.